Okay, picking up with chapter 12, Style and Function of Music in Society. Okay, so if you've done the reading for this chapter 12, great. I'm going to keep this lecture pretty short. I'm going to skip a few things. I'm just going to kind of focus on the main things that I want you to know for this chapter. So, if you haven't done so already, please open up the lecture slides called Style and Function of Music in Society slides in Canvas. All right, and so then let's move on. So we're going to first talk about genre. And so genre is really just a general term that suggests an overall type of music. So a song could be a genre. Solo piano music can be a genre. A symphony can be a genre, right? There are many genres. I didn't name them all, I just named a few. Now, the thing about genre, we also have, and our book didn't really talk about this, but we have sub-genres, right? So we have genre, and then under that, subgenre, and then in a lot of cases, we have subgenres even within that. So take solo piano music, for example. We could say, okay, well, solo piano music is the genre, but under that, we could say we have classical solo piano music. That would be one subgenre. And then another subgenre, we could say solo jazz piano music, right? So that could be two subgenres within solo piano music. Okay, so if we take song, for example, same thing, right? We could say song is the genre, but under that, we could say one subgenre, we could say there's country songs, right? And then another subgenre of song could be like rock songs, right? Maybe you could say even like heavy metal songs, right? And then a third subgenre of song could be hip hop songs, right? Now, even within those three subgenres, right? Country, rock, hip hop, we could have subgenres under those as well, right? Like we could say for rock music, the second one, we could say there's like heavy metal, right? And then we could say that's one subgenre. Then there's kind of like soft rock, kind of would be another one. We could even get more specific. We could say there's sort of like set 1970s rock versus like 1960s rock. Those would all be sort of different subgenres within the rock subgenre, and then above that we have like song for the genre. So we could kind of do that with most of these genres and subgenres. Okay, so that's the idea of genre. Keep that in mind. Now, another thing to keep in mind about genre, not all music fits kind of like nice and neat within a specific genre. Sometimes you have music that crosses over or kind of borrows from different genres. You could say A Day in the Life, right, which is a Beatles song. It's kind of a 60s rock song, right? It's within that kind of subgenre, but so I guess it's a song, it's that genre, but it's also if you watch it, you'll notice maybe about a minute and a half to 2 minutes in, there's also kind of a symphonic component to this. So it's sort of a song, but it also has kind of a symphony to it. And so we could say it's in the song genre, but it's also kind of borrowing from the symphony genre. So we could say that A Day in the Life is kind of a crossover because it's borrowing elements from at least two different genres. Okay, so that's the idea of genre and subgenre. Let's move on to our next slide, number 3. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in your book. It talks about some other things like medium and stuff like that. You should read that, you should know about that, but I don't think we really need to talk about it for this particular class. One thing, though, that we want to talk about is oral transmission, right? This is a pretty important concept for this class. Oral transmission can be defined as the preservation of music without the aid of written notation, okay? What do we mean by written notation? So written notation is really, it's this stuff, right? We've probably all seen this. Some of you probably even read written music notation. The thing, though, is music of most cultures of the world, they don't really use written notation like this. This is more of a Western music kind of thing. And the way this written notation stuff works is I can take a piece of music that's in written notation, having never heard it before, right, as in oral transmission, I could just read this, right? I can tell, now I'm not really a pianist, so I'm not a great reader of music for piano, but I could see, okay, for my left hand, it's this particular note, A. For my right hand, at the same time, it's supposed to be the note C, and so we're supposed to start off like that. And then we go to here, and then we go to here, and then to here. All right, so I'm just kind of reading this music without ever having heard it before. What I just did, that's not oral transmission. Okay, oral transmission would be if okay, so if I went like this and say I'm teaching somebody how to play piano and I go, okay, how about do this? Right? And so I didn't write it down. I just said, how about, okay, you watch this and listen to it, and then you do it. You copy me, imitate me. Right? And then, so I'm giving an example, and then I'm saying, how about learn it by imitating me, right? You've heard it, you've sort of seen me do it, now just copy what I do, right? That would be an example of oral transmission. So then whoever learned this little thing from me, by just watching and listening, then they go and perform it by memory, right? And maybe they add something else. They go, how about this one now? And then maybe they then teach that to somebody else. Those would be examples of oral transmission. Keep this idea in mind, this idea of oral transmission versus written notation. It's going to come up in this class pretty often, especially just the idea of oral transmission. Most of the music that we're going to study later in this class has to do with oral transmission rather than written notation. All right, so now let's move on to our final slide. And again, we're kind of skipping ahead a little bit in the book here. Let's just briefly talk about the concept of style. So the concept of style can be maybe just generally defined as the characteristic way an artwork is presented, whether that artwork is painting or music or architecture or sculpture or writing perhaps or dancing. Any of those kinds of things could be called an art or an artwork. And so style is the characteristic way that art is presented. We could also think of it as the distinctive flavor that makes one culture's music or art, or perhaps individual artist, kind of distinct or unique from all others. Right, in this class, we will be talking about that very thing, more in terms of entire cultures rather than individual artists. But you could think of it as that, right? The distinctive way one culture is unique from all others. At least in this class, one culture's music is unique from all others. Perhaps a more precise way to talk about style is the unique way of organizing the basic elements of an art. Think about, let's talk about this in terms of painting a little bit. We'll talk about this in terms of two individual painters. And then we'll talk about it in terms of music. But think about, okay, these two painters, Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat. They are, we see them here on slide number 4. We don't see any of their artwork, but we see their photograph. So they were friends in New York, and they were kind of hitting their prime in like 1980s New York. And let's talk about Andy Warhol's unique style, right? How did he arrange the elements of painting in a unique way, in his own unique way? Well, he did something that is now called pop art. So an example of his style is he would take kind of some ordinary thing, like he'd go to the grocery store and he'd see like some Campbell's soup cans. And so he'd go home and he'd paint a bunch of Campbell's soup cans. In fact, Google Andy Warhol Campbell soup cans, and you'll see his painting. He basically painted a bunch of soup cans, but they're all kind of slightly different, right? We see some named tomato, some named minestrone, some named chicken noodle, and so on. So that's kind of the way he organizes his painting in a unique way. Compare that with his friend Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was another painter, and he had a really different style. I would say his style is probably more interesting than Warhol's. If you just Google Basquiat paintings, you'll find often his style is kind of characterized by kind of these thick black lines, right? That he uses kind of these kind of thick black lines to paint skulls and like birds pretty often, and like cats. And also in his style, we see kind of these X's and O's in almost like a tic-tac-toe kind of style. We see that kind of show up in several of his paintings. We could say that's part of his style, right? He incorporates that. And in addition to that, we often see letters kind of arranged in the way you might see them in like a kindergarten classroom. We see like an uppercase A, and then right next to it like in lowercase a. Kind of like you'd see like, in kindergarten classroom where you see then it'd be like uppercase B and then lowercase b and then uppercase C, lowercase c, and so on. So we see this kind of specific way he's taking the elements of painting and he's organizing them in his own paintings, and it's in a unique way, right? We don't really see anybody prior to him doing that, right? We could say that's his style. That's Basquiat's style, right? Let's think about this in terms of music, right? Because we've been specifically studying the elements of music, right? And what are some of the elements of music, right? We've studied like pitch, we've studied rhythm and melody. How about phrasing and cadences? We've studied like tempo and dynamics, right? All those kinds of things, right? Harmony, all these kinds of things. So we could say that some musicians and some they organize these things in certain unique ways, right? Like if we think about like the rock band Black Sabbath from the 70s, right? They have kind of a unique style, right? They often use the interval of what's called a tritone, right? Or an augmented fourth in their music. We hear that pretty often in their music. We could say that's part of their style, right? So we see this in individual musicians and individual bands, but we also see this idea of style as far as organizing the elements of music in a unique way. we see it in specific cultures, right? And we're going to talk about this more as we move through the class. So that does it for this chapter. I will talk to you soon.